Okay, welcome to the Stage Left podcast, lifting the veil on the music industry by telling the stories of those with a unique vantage point. This podcast exists to provide free educational content for young artists entering an increasingly complex industry by telling the stories of some of the unsung heroes behind the success. So go to thestageleftpodcast.com for all episodes featuring musicians who discuss in detail the recording, writing and performing processes with the likes of Beyonce, David Bowie, Gorillaz, Michael Jackson, the Beatles, Fleetwood Mac, Nick Cave, Oasis, Dua Lipa, and Kraftwerk. Today, we are joined by a legend. Not only a founding member of Bleachers, our Grammy-winning guest has appeared on records by the following: Bruce Springsteen, Lana Del Rey, St. Vincent, David Byrne, Diana Ross, Peter Gabriel, Taylor Swift, Tame Impala, Sabrina Carpenter, Paul McCartney, and Kendrick Lamar, to name but a few. Today, we'll be exploring the recording process of some of his hits he's played on, how to best negotiate fees as an emerging artist without it feeling bloody awkward, what have been the sliding doors moments in his career, how Bleachers stay as a tight unit, and what it was like playing on Please, Please, Please by Sabrina Carpenter, arguably the best pop song in the past decade if you've yet to hear it. So it's a pleasure to say that our guest today on the StageLeft podcast is none other than Evan Smith. Thanks for joining us today, Evan. How's it going?
Chris, good. Thank you so much, Chris. Wow, that is an impressive introduction. I'll take it.
You'll take it. You'll take it. That's good. Now we're recording this. A few days after the Super Bowl performance, and you played on TV Off, which is a song that Kendrick Lamar played towards the end of his set. What's it like sitting down to watch something like that and knowing that your music is being potentially piped to one of the largest TV audiences of all time?
It's always really humbling in a way, I think it's kind of crazy to have made it this far in the music industry and just have so much history and understanding of kind of like process. And sometimes, like a moment like that is like, on the one hand, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I did that, and on the other, it's like, what? Like, doesn't quite make sense. I think, yeah, really humbling and just pretty wild. I mean, also an incredible performance. So
It was an incredible performance with lots
just
of
energy's
interesting.
wild.
Yeah. There's lots of interesting kind of points that were made throughout it. Have you got past the point of being surprised when you hear yourself when you're not expecting it? So if you're in a coffee shop, or if you're, I don't know, a gig and the music's been piped beforehand or anything like that. Obviously, for every young artist, there's going to be so many young artists listening to this going like, that is the dream. You to hear your own music that you performed on being played at a Super Bowl or something like that, that is for many people the dream. At what point do you go, oh yeah, that's just something that I did? Like, at what point did
Mm,
it happen in your career?
it's weird. It's almost like, I don't know if that excitement or that kind of like, you know, just childlike amazement is ever going to go away. And that's maybe, if I were going to speculate here, I would say that's maybe that was part of the magic that I was trying to chase to begin with, or something, that if this worked, where I could actually continue to do this, that I might have these sort of amazing like moments throughout my life, that I might not achieve if I were whatever I would have been doing before, And so I don't know. I guess a couple years ago, I was skating at the ice rink here in town in Portland where I live, and take my daughter to the rink all the time. And they were playing this Taylor Swift song, "False God," that starts with this like this kind of freaky tenor sax thing, and I kind of play like this little line throughout the song. Um, and I think my daughter was 4 at the time. I was like, "Hey, you know, wait, stop, listen." And I just was like, she doesn't care about this. I mean, she was like, "Oh, cool, Dad." But um, I, it's awesome. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a bit of both kind of. There's sometimes there's secrets in your brain. You're like you're listening to something, you might be in a public space and it's playing, and you kind of, I can look at my partner or a friend or whatever and be like, or sometimes if we're on the road and it happens, let's say I'm with like one of the drummers in Bleachers or something, it might be, "Hey, nice parts," or something like, "There you go, Riddles," or getting on a plane, or something. You sometimes might hear somebody and you could look over at them and be like, "Good job with that."
Yeah.
It's a little crazy. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
It's kind of
The
surreal.
immediacy of that. widely broadcast thing, and your very sometimes seemingly small sort of relationship to it, then all of a sudden you're just like, oh no, this is like a thing that's first of all it's not mine, and but you can kind of be, I don't know, you gotta have these two relationships with it, if that makes sense. I don't know. One is like, oh, I'm glad I did that, and another is like maybe like hmm, as a listener, as like a stranger. Mhm.
It's very, very interesting because for me, with something like the Super Bowl, which is, as I say, I remember the statistic a few years ago, which were the 10 biggest TV audiences of all time. 9 of them were the Super Bowl, and the other was the Seinfeld finale, right? And I don't know if that's been bumped off or not, but clearly the Super Bowl has been
Whoa.
seen by so many people. And I just wondered, whilst you wouldn't know that your music was going to be played at the Super Bowl, but you have played on songs which, before you actually played your part, you could probably work out whatever I play next, if it makes the mix, it's going to be heard by thousands of millions of people, like genuinely, because of the artists that you're working with. So,
Yeah.
given that you've played on countless records like that, and you know that it's going to be heard by so many people, how does that expectation of knowing it's going to be heard by lots of people impact your creativity, maybe subconsciously or
Mm.
otherwise? It's a bit like an artist with a canvas and knowing this is going to be seen eventually by a million people, and I've not actually put a paintbrush to the canvas yet. Does that impact you? Do you think about that at all? And how do you block out that noise?
It lights a fire in me a little bit sometimes when, especially when life is hard. You might be in like a weird week. Maybe your boss is sick, or maybe you're just dealing with life, and it's hard to get in the studio for whatever reason. It can be logistically hard, or emotionally hard, or just creative. You might be creatively, kind of burnt out or something. There are times when, if something comes through and you kind of like, you could be like, what? Wow, okay, and it can snap you out of like the just life's hardships. I, I'm, I mean, I remember a few years ago when our daughter was a, a lot younger. Um, sleep cycles are really crazy for little kids and stuff. So your sleep as an adult is really impacted, and on top of that, you're creating play all day long, with this young human, and then you're like supposed to snap your fingers and then uh, be professionally creative, in your studio. I mean, I'm lucky I have a studio here at home, um, so the commute isn't very far. But I remember kind of thinking like some of those days were really hard. You're so fried, and then yeah, it would for me anyway. It would sometimes be a little bit of like, oh, sick. Let's see what we got, and you're digging pretty deep. And at that point, I will say, probably half the time there's no lead vocal, so I don't know.
Mm.
I think that's a like I don't know who the track is for.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of times I don't know. Yeah, and I think that's like maybe I think with certain producers and it's kind of a good strategy for protecting, if something were to leak or whatever, you obviously are password protecting files and stuff, but then on top of that, the file itself is like missing some key identifiers, which would otherwise, maybe if it leaked or something. I mean, that's my assumption of why that happens. But yeah, a lot of times I'm like, I'll hear something and be like, oh, that was that thing. Oh, that was that thing I worked on. It was for this Taylor Swift re-record record, or what have you. Like these little mysteries, and you're kind of so. Also, despite what I was saying before about it being a bit of a fire, which it certainly is when because most of the time I don't know. I've learned to just like anything is like that. And I approach all of it. I try to approach anything that I'm working on, whether I'm talking directly with an artist or not, as just a chance to like flush out my best work, my best ideas. It's taking a long. I mean, there's no replacing time, I guess, in that equation. Really, I wasn't always like that, but I think that's where I'm at these days. Is kind of since you don't know, you might as well assume that it's going to be in the Super Bowl.
And what about how you you kind of touched upon it a little bit there, but how you thrive best when you're recording. So maybe this kind of anonymity possibly helps, not knowing who it is, or, maybe go the other way and kind of light the fire. But if you're at
Mm.
your best from a creative point of view, so you're writing parts, I mean, obviously you probably get briefs and that type of thing, and maybe you get parts written for you occasionally, but I'd imagine you write a lot of your own parts. What are the conditions that you need to thrive most? Like if you had the perfect conditions, what would they be to get the very best out of you? What are the common things that are in place that often results in your best kind of output?
Well, since there's a lot of remote recording these days, there's kind of like two lanes, you know. One is if I'm recording myself doing, you know, and I have my tools, my instruments, you know, and I can just be really focused. Like I close the door of my studio, and I can just be like so immersed in whatever it is. That's really helpful for me. Like almost like literally blocking out the other stuff going on. Um, on the other side, you know, working in session like with an engineer, speed for me is really beneficial. Like if I am doing, let's say, an overdub, or I want to punch in at a certain part of a track that I'm recording, and somebody gives me like an 8 bar lead in, that's a lot of time for my brain. That's a lot of time to forget what I was going to do, or kind of start to second guess what I was going to do, and try and, my brain will try and come up with another, quote unquote, better idea. Whereas if somebody's like, okay, gotcha, and it's like 4 beats into the idea, for me, that works better. And also, I mean, yeah, I think just in terms of working with an engineer, just an engineer that's focused, like that's sitting and actually listening as deeply to what's going on as I am, as a musician. And when you make a request, it's sort of like instant. You can instantly be. It's almost preserving this sort of energetic like bubble that's happening. You know, sometimes this doesn't happen anymore. I mean, a lot of the times when I'm in session, I'm with like the best engineers in the world. I mean, Laura Sisk, Ollie Jacobs come to mind. You know, I'll be working with them, and it's like water in the desert. You know, it's they are so very very good at everything, and they're just amazing musicians. So that's another thing. But yeah, like um, for parts, sometimes if I'm picking up a different instrument to add another layer to like uh, a section or something, or like a little gesture that I'm coming up with in a song or something. But it's going to take 4 passes or 5 for the whole like little chamber group to sort of be a thing. Um, years ago, it would sort of be like what would really throw me off is if like somebody's criticizing the first pass or the second voice. It's going to be 6. I'm probably the only one who knows that, but there's always time for criticism, and and group, and I am very much like let it go, and if it sticks, it's cool. If not, or like, oh yeah, it could be better, let's redo it, or like, I love um tweaking stuff. But yeah, to be interrupted in the middle of creating like something that, if somebody's yeah, criticizing something that's in the works versus like, okay, that's the gesture, what do we think? I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
Um, Now, obviously, most listeners will know this, but you work very closely with Jack Antonoff, both in Bleachers, but also you're kind of very much a go-to person for him in the world of a lot of the production he does.
Mm.
Do you think that having that existing relationship enables you to play better in some ways because he can feed back probably in a different way because you're a close relationship than you otherwise would do? Or does that actual close relationship get in the way in some way as well? How does that dynamic work between almost kind of friendship and like being a bandmate, but also being a work colleague at the same time? How do you kind of compartmentalize those two things?
He's such a awesome, he's just such a great musician. His listening, his ability to communicate, and also the sensitivity, I think, of like just human interaction, like communication, is just such a he's really just gifted. So you don't ever feel, I've never felt like anything I sent was a bad idea, you know. And I mean, we've been friends for what is it, almost like 12 years or something. I mean, so I think there's so much trust that develops over the years. yeah, and there must be some integrity there that was like pretty immediate or pretty early on, where the first few things he asked me to do um, worked, or he just trusted something about what I was doing, and wasn't afraid to show it. So yeah, so I think for me it doesn't get in the way at all. It's the opposite. I mean, it's like it's still just a crazy joy. I mean, it's privilege, to get to, after all this time, really, just like I'm still searching for stuff, and still able to be myself in the process. So when I say stuff, I'm searching for ideas, searching for like textures, or it could be like melodies, or like I said before, just a little cracks, as my brain interprets the little, where's the space here, and and yeah, always feel like there's a home for those ideas.
That's
So
great, and that's going to keep you being really creative because you're probably not overthinking about it if you've got that kind of feeling that it's home for those ideas. What's
mhm.
the typical like Jack brief? Is it here's the track, do whatever you want, or is it this is a part of a track where we're looking for a specific thing? Can you play something that is reminiscent of X? Can you play it this particular way? What's a typical brief from Jack?
A lot of times it's, are you free to play on something? I'd be like,
Nice.
yeah, and it's sent, and I do my thing. Back to the trust thing, or the, yeah, fewer words of direction even now, than ever, maybe. There are times in the studio, I will say, where we're working on something together, and he's singing a line to me or something, like pretty specific, oh no, like that, or we'll start something, and I'm maybe approaching like a sax thing with 60% intensity, and really it would be better if it were like 90% or 100% or something. So, okay, cool, let's redo it, let's start over, and it's usually pretty quick in those cases to sort of be like, um correcting course. But the the direction, create the brief, like in terms of like, yeah, sometimes it's like one or two words.
And so, therefore, you can choose which instruments you play on it, or is it a case that you can? Because obviously, you play more, a number of instruments. So, is he very specific about what he wants, or is it a case that you just listen to the track, do your thing, and then he'll use what he wants to later on?
Well, sometimes it'll be like, can you do horns on this?
Nice. Yeah.
Or sometimes it'll be like, go crazy on, do your thing. But yeah, often it'll be like, some horns, think like 70s, or think like, I mean, I'm kind of just riffing here. I'm not quoting Jack per se, but it'll be like, it'll be, do something like, Sergeant Pepper's, or like brassy stuff like that, like that. Yeah. But
That brings me on to I think you kind of gathered this from a message that I sent you, but when you hear a song like and you really fall in love with that song and you're kind of playing it a lot over like a 2 week period straight afterwards. I'm
yeah.
in the middle of that with Please 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 by Sabrina Carpenter. Like I
Oh,
know it's released
okay.
about I think it was released about 9 months ago, but like I'm completely obsessed. My 4-year-old daughter like reenacts like
Oh,
live versions and stuff like that. It's such a classic. And what was really interesting, so it's 3 minutes and 6 seconds of like just some of the best pop music I've heard in ages. It's the first song in 12 years to go to, oh no, 16 years to go to number one with a key change in it as well, which is obviously quite
really?
unusual. Yeah, yeah. It's the first song in 16 years to go to the top of the Billboard chart with a key change in it.
It
And it's
makes
got
me
a
wonder what the previous one was.
no,
Do you know?
I'll have to have a look and I'll let you know.
Okay.
But the structure is really unusual as well. So it's like verse, chorus, then this kind of key change feels like a middle eight, but it's not. It's kind of second verse, back to the chorus, and then another middle eight that's actually an outro, which sounds exactly like a chord progression the Beatles would play. Like I was listening to it, it's like this is a George
Yeah.
Harrison song that is just the lyrics are very sung very differently. And it was so nice to see Jack do a video where he was basically saying, "I went for ELO and the Beatles as a kind of influence."
Mm.
On this, so you can definitely hear that. What are your memories from first playing on that or hearing that song to the final production of it? Because I know you played some extra parts that weren't eventually kind of on the mix. But tell us about
Hmm.
how you got involved in that song from beginning to end.
I don't think there was a vocal on that song at all. I got it, and it was obviously. And by the way, usually, if it's Ollie or Laura or Jack, they'll send me two track. They just will send me a two-track balance, like a stereo mix of wherever wherever they're at, in the production process. So that was, I think, an example where there was no vocal. Um, but I remember being excited um about well, yeah, what it was pointing at, I guess. Yeah, the ELO thing. Yeah. It was, and I was, see, I mean, I started as a jazz saxophone player, so I came out of, and I went to music school, and part of my involvement in pop and rock and performing, not non improvisatory music, really is like unlearning certain things. um and uh and I think this might be a good uh, moment here to just highlight the fact that, when a track like that comes through, it, first of all, it's not like necessarily an outlier. I mean, if you listen to Bleacher stuff too, there's all sorts of like stuff going on that would be, let's say, non-traditional, I guess,
Mm.
in like a pop sense. um but it is obviously exciting, the part of my brain that like spent years and years in a practice room getting good at, yeah, like chord changes and all sorts of pretty heady um pretty heady stuff. And so I remember being excited by that, and I can remember if he asked for flutes or if that was something I just reached for here. Shoot, I can't really remember, but I do remember feeling this kind of like almost like sine wavy, kind of breathy, like the flute thing
Mm.
would be a good contrast to a lot of these kind of bright, like really poppy, bouncy synths and stuff that were happening in that track. Um, I remember feeling like it was pretty like sunny, pretty like yellowy and orangey to me, and so yeah. But I think and I remember seeing at least a part of an interview where he was talking about those flutes, and I think he just kept one like instead of like all these pads. I tried to make them be, all these like flute pads be a little like warbly, kind of like almost like you're listening to a record. So I was like kind of pitching uh these inner voices, in like a 3 or 4 part harmony thing, kind of pitching them around like the record was like spinning.
What a great idea. Well, hopefully
But
there'll
yeah,
be
it
a
wasn't it
version bit.
wasn't
Hopefully there'll be a
yeah,
version bit that we might we might hear one day, because it'd be so interesting to hear the parts that
maybe. I remember they were like very like pretty flutes, like you could play this on a mellotron and it would sound like a mellotron, or you could do this thing, and I was like, I'd rather do this thing. But
it's a great song. Now, what about, let's talk about you used a very interesting word there about unlearning stuff from your music education.
yeah.
Tell us more about that. So from what you did learn through your music education to what you're doing now, obviously you're using quite a lot of that, I'd imagine. But what are the specifics you've had to unlearn to position yourself doing such? Because you do a lot of jazz stuff, but also just stuff that isn't jazz. What are the specifics that you've had to unlearn?
That's a great question. One of the bigger things comes down to language. Like, just because somebody doesn't speak the language of chord changes or the language of song form, in like a traditional jazz sense or something, or somebody doesn't um, know the names of the, different modes, or and can't call chords by their numbers. All these things that, when you're in jazz school, anyways, become just a part of you. Just because somebody doesn't speak that language doesn't mean that uh, they're like creatively less than or something. Right? So pointing at the sort of the very bigger like to blow that idea up for me was just like music is fine. Music is you don't, if none of us picked up an instrument ever again, like music is like a universal like phenomenon. It's like a force, like a physical, it's like something you could talk about on a blackboard, and I'm sure people do, with chalk, or you could get in the, you could get in there and sing, or you could bang on a rock or what, bang on a stick or something. I mean, so music is fine just because you master all of all of this language in this specific way doesn't mean that when you start working with people who don't speak that language, you're going to be like dumbing down what you do or something. I
Mm.
mean, and nobody ever told me that verbatim really, but they did, but I did get a heavy dose while I was in jazz school. I got a pretty heavy dose from some older professors like, um, pop music is, boring, and meanwhile I'm looking at like, okay, well, I mean, everybody seems to like this music, and of course as a kid I was like playing guitar on rock records and singing rock and pop records and alternative records and stuff in my bedroom. So going way back, it was like part of me. I just kind of intuited this thing from people in school, which was like, well, you're signing up for a life of poverty, but you'll be doing, the Lord's work. So this is gonna be good. It's just like I'm very glad that it turned out to be utterly not true.
It's interesting what you say there, because I think there's
Yeah.
one part of your job that perhaps, or musician's job, particularly if they've come from a very technical background and maybe working with musicians eventually who don't have that technical background, is that you need to be a really good translator, because they're probably
Mhm.
feeding you ideas and you need to work out, okay, what do they actually mean by that, and then be able to try and translate that. Have you got any advice to emerging artists, if they're in that position, about how best to interpret what's been fed to you if it's coming from someone who isn't technical, and get the best out of what they want and you want?
I think you used the perfect word, technical. I mean, just I would say to somebody who is an artist who's, let's say, trying to put a band together, or is already has a band. Maybe some of them are like they went to music school or something, and know some of that specific language. Um, I actually, I would almost say the same thing to both of those parties. That in that theoretical situation, I might say just consider the barriers of, that, I mean, technology in all its wonder and magic and stuff is just like, I mean, what if you don't want to run Pro Tools? What if you don't know how to mess with Ableton? What if you get to a point where your songs are awesome? I mean, objectively great songs, and now people are, paying attention to you, and you're doing something in your career, and you of course need to hire people to like play a show. But what if you never really like, and all the time when you were like honing in on your artistic voice and everything, just never bothered to like, translate it to a computer. You just never sat down and learned Logic or whatever. um it's not, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean you suck. It doesn't mean you're not technically like a musician who's doing things, or it's just, you've got, that is a significant barrier, I think, for a lot of young artists, is just the, I mean, first of all, who you have to get a laptop, you have to have a computer.
True.
I'm just thinking about it like that. There's a lot of like socioeconomic stuff that goes into just making music sometimes these days. And you assume because you walked in somebody's studio that's running Pro Tools and has a huge, mixing console and stuff, that like, you're never going to get there. I mean, it can be overwhelming. So, and for somebody who's joined a band, who went to music school or whatever, um, who has joined a band and is now, that's being led by somebody who doesn't know the same language, like you have to, okay, well, listen harder, and try and get, because, a lot of it is the ego, I think, but you can look past that. And if you recognize that like technology itself has like made this impact on the kind of flow of things, it's it could maybe lead to a little bit of understanding, I think, you know. Also, keep playing jazz. I don't know, have keep, have your own side. If that's something you know and do and feel is a part of you, then by all you have to keep playing, you know. But I don't know.
It's
Mm,
interesting that so many artists that I've met or interviewed through the podcast, I reckon very small percentage of them, the work that they're most well known for is the work they're proudest of. It doesn't necessarily all align
mm,
like that. So I think your piece there, you just said about like have your own thing on the side, like making sure that you're kind of fulfilling that creativity that you
mm.
want to do, I think is really, really important. Let's pick out a couple of like songs that you played on that, that are really kind of entwined with culture. And I mean, so firstly, you recorded Paul McCartney, and that's a really interesting part. It's a very interesting song as well. So it's like again
Mm.
a very unusual chord structure and very kind of unusual vibe for a McCartney song, or mainstream McCartney song. And that was with Saint Vincent. What's your memories of recording that?
I think Annie was listening to a lot of like Portishead at the time, maybe, and she was kind of giving me some direction a little bit in that vibe, or in that realm, as I remember. Um, and um, I knew what that I knew what that was. Uh,
Did
she,
you? You
yeah,
knew it.
she told me, just she was open about it and everything. Well, I think he had already recorded, but maybe not yet released the McCartney 3.
Yeah,
This was for the um basically
like a
like kind of
reissue,
the
wasn't it?
remixes.
Yeah, yeah, remixes. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yeah. So he had engaged her to do that, and yeah, that was nice. I remember being pretty excited and not wanting to like overdo it. Another thing, not wanting to sin too much, or for parts to be, I don't know if that's even that cerebral anymore. I think it's a felt thing more than it is like a calculated uh oh, she said this, so I don't, I should only, play like this, or oh, I need to like change my you know input. I need to change my channel strip up so that I can sound like that those horns do, in that way, or whatever. I don't really, I don't remember feeling very stressed about it. I do remember being super, super excited about it. And she was also excited about it at the time. And that was somewhat infectious, I think. Yeah.
And how did the final product, so songs for women and wives, how did that come out? Given you when you were recording it, did it come out similarly to how you thought it would come out in regards to your parts and that type of thing, or did it
Yeah.
sound very? Oh, it did good.
That one did. Yeah. There was very little of what I sent, I think, was cut, or, um, yeah, I don't remember. I think most of it ended up, which was doubly cool. Not that I really measure anything by that anymore. But yeah, I think that was a nice surprise.
What do you measure things by now that I mean, here's a list of Taylor Swift songs you played on. So Out of the Woods, and there are different versions of this, but I Can
Mm,
See You, All Too Well, Vigilante Shit, Anti-Hero. I mean, these are like August. These are going to be songs that are going to be played for decades, Evan. These are real classics in the pop world right now. What are your memories working with Taylor, or has that been quite removed and has it been through Jack? And
mhm.
what are your what's your thoughts on the fact that you've worked with such an artist who is just, she's in regards to size of gigs and that type of thing. She's, I'm 41. I remember when Michael Jackson was touring, playing all those nights at Wembley Stadium in the late 80s, and like I think she's broken those records, right? So,
Mm.
that's those records have been played for decades. So, what's your kind of fondest memories working on Taylor Swift material?
Well, I haven't yet worked in the studio with her, but it's so you're right. It is usually through Jack or Laura or Ollie, sending things via Jack's direction or something, for those projects. I will say that the last few well, that's not technically true, but the re-records that we did, um, those were that was a first for me. I mean, it was a first, I think, for a lot of us. a pretty unique situation to be in terms of um, a recording engagement. First of all, the music's already out there and well known, but that it was, apart from what I probably anything I've said before about my process or my thought process day to day, that was really different. That was like, I am going to push this synth to I am going to get that exact sound, And I was like, I was very, I really got into the sport of mimicry there as much as possible. And not just that, I felt like there were times where I was like, I think I can make this a little bit different, maybe a little cooler, and I would send that on knowing like, well, if it's out of bounds, it's just going to get cut, it just won't, so you might make, but I'm telling you, there's some of especially the synth like arpeggiated stuff that's happening on those records, the layers, there'd be multiple layers of arpeggiation happening and stuff, and just getting super granular about what each of those layers is, recreating it, and then putting them back in a way that feels like, it's even more kind of 3D or something. That was like, I never been in a situation like that. So those are different. Usually, um, yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to dodge the part of your question where, you're talking about the fact that those songs will be played for quite a while, most likely. I mean, it's just that I don't, I think if I really thought about that too much, sometimes I might not be as light on my feet or as quick to like, get my best self out or recorded, on something that I'm being asked to do. So to be honest, I don't really, even for some of the stuff that's out there, and it's crazy to say because I did spend like my 20s and some of my 30s just sort of thinking, man, it would be great to be on like a big song, or it'd be like, I wish I had more going, I wish I had more kind of coming in that I could work on. Um, I'm aware that now I do have some stuff that I've done that has been pretty that has been a part of something big, but I think that's also part of it too. It's I'm just a part of the process. So there's a comfort there, and also, yeah, I mean, there is a comfort there where you're just kind of like, hmm, yeah. I mean, I don't really know how else to put that, but I think there's an awareness of your kind of place in the process, um, if that makes sense.
It does, and some of those are the kind of Taylor's versions, and a lot of people say, "Oh, they're the kind of." A lot of people I know say, "Oh, they're the kind of cool versions," and so it's interesting that it strikes me that when you speak about some of these songs that you played on, actually, the challenge of playing a song that is going to be heard by a lot of people, actually, you really lean into it and you see it as an opportunity to really show off what you can do, and just like, oh, I can maximize this, and which I think is really good, because I think a lot of artists, or certainly emerging artists who aren't as experienced as you, would be like, filled with dread or daunts and then shackled in some way, which is what we don't want to do.
Mm,
That's not going to help us as a musician. You talked about in your 20s and 30s and gigs that you might have got or not got, or thought, I want to do more of. I think this is a really
mm.
important question. What do you think are the sliding doors moments that happened in kind of either the beginning, the middle, or even recently, the current stage of your career, that if they hadn't occurred in those sliding doors moments, you wouldn't be sat here talking to me having played on all these records?
And do you mean when you say sliding door, do you mean like the little seemingly insignificant decision you made that turned out to be
Yeah, so there's a film.
bigger?
Sorry, you might not. There's a film in the UK, so it's quite a UK phrase actually, where someone, I think it's Gwyneth Paltrow, is running to get
Uh-huh.
on a tube, and the door's shut, and she doesn't get on the tube. But there's
Mm.
a alternate version when she just makes it on the tube, on the underground, or the subway in the UK, and she goes home, and I think she sees her husband having an affair with someone, and her whole life
Okay.
changes. Like, that's the sliding doors moment. So from
Okay.
your perspective, what are the moments where it's like, if I hadn't been in that particular place at that particular time,
Mm.
how might things have played differently, or if that person hadn't helped me in that situation?
early on, one of the things that is coming to my mind is just applying for I went to a performing arts school for high school in Dallas. It's like grade 9, 10, 11, 12. And at the time, the school I was in before, like a bunch of my friends were going to this other high school that I had applied to get into as well in Dallas. But I applied to this art school because I was kind of interested in music, like to know more about music as an eighth grader. Um, and I think I had enough encouragement from my eighth grade band director as well to like do that, which it felt like a really big thing. I mean, it's a pretty well-known high school in Dallas called Arts Magnet or Booker T. Washington. And So yeah, I mean, I got in and just kind of just sort of felt like, oh, okay, I got in. Well, I'll go here, and then that was like, the whole world just kind of opens in a way in that environment. Which is not just music. I mean, there's theater and visual art and dance and stuff. So all your friends are up to something cool. So that was one early on. May seem obvious. I mean, maybe not like totally sliding door really, but that's enough. I think in terms of the middle part of my journey, um, two things. One is like when I moved to New York from Montreal after school, I was like I said before, I was doing a lot of like through composed music, like non-vocal, like improvisatory music, and a friend from high school who was living in New York and had just moved there from Berkeley, from leaving Berkeley in Boston. Was like, hey, I'm recording some music. Like, can you come and play, some saxophone on some of these tracks? Just a 3-song demo or whatever he was recording. And it was Mac Price and the Tapes. And I showed up, and and played these parts with a friend, and then it was sort of like, yeah, well, we're gonna play some shows. Can you rehearse? And I was like, okay, cool. And this was like really not what I was usually. This was kind of like, well, it was like rock music. It was like more poppy rock music. And later, like the name was changed to the Prigs when we had that band for 8 years or so, and maybe 7 years in New York. And that was like the thing that snapped me out of basically playing smaller. I was as a as a jazz saxophone player, I was playing like a lot of like small shows to a lot of friends. A lot of friends would come out. The support was amazing. Like we were all supporting each other back then, and but this band, the Prigs, was different because we had standing gigs at bars, and lots of people would come in. Like it would be like kind of standing room only, and then they would be singing your songs back. So there was this energy in the room that was like
Hmm.
probably why I was interested in music in the first place. Like as a little kid, probably like when I was imagining playing like all those Weezer songs, whatever. I was playing guitar, Pearl Jam, Nirvana. That I was absorbing some sort of that energy, and so that was the thing where I was like, oh well. Looking back on it, I stopped, or you could say I started doing more music like, yeah, like that was almost like kind of a yacht rock, like Huey Lewis inspired band. Um, but I kind of stepped into more of like a rock
Hmm.
identity. I blossomed as, as a rock saxophone player. I guess maybe you could put it that way. Anyways, yeah, another one was when my then girlfriend, now my wife, and I left New York. I was offered a tour for an artist I won't mention, but I was my brother was getting married something like 5 months away from whenever I was asked. And I was like, yeah, totally. I can do this whole tour except for this one day because my brother's getting married. And that was, to be honest, like that. when somebody's just initial trying to just put together a band, for whatever reason, for that camp at that time, that was enough to like lose the gig.
Really?
Yeah, so I'm on the way out to the middle of basically nowhere in Texas, to spend a few months. So yeah, there was this uncomfortable thing where you kind of like, no, well, that's a bummer, and you
Does your
kind of
brother
move
know that?
on. But
Does your brother know
what's
that?
that?
Does your brother know that?
I don't know. Well, he's gonna know, I guess, right? He's gonna know now.
Wow.
But I was watching the footage from that tour, which toured for like 2 years or something, all over the world. And at times I was really pretty removed from that type of living. I had to get a cooking job on this ranch and like conference center out there, close to where I was living. And yeah, it was something between, basically like between the time I was in St. Vincent and Bleachers, which was like a little bit of a emotionally challenging time at some point. So yeah, that was like, but I said I was honest, so the sliding door part, I guess, would just be like I was filled with possibility. Here I am leaving New York, not because I'm upset with New York or whatever. We just wanted to do something fun for the summer. And then and we were gonna come back, and then I was like, oh well, yeah, this is great. Yes, totally. And this one day I'll have to. I was just sort of like leading with that honesty or that integrity or something. And at that time, it was like enough to lose something. But I was like, what I didn't know was that I was making myself really, really available. It was just a little bit longer. I needed another year or something before somebody said, a friend texted me, oh, hey, Jack Antonoff from Fun is starting a new band, and I recommended you, like, can you send a reel or any kind of footage of you playing, and can you send some, so I was like, I had there wasn't any stickiness for me, in terms of like like getting, in terms of like a big yes. I mean, when that happened, I was literally making pizzas, I was like at this little like pizza restaurant where I had my hands were covered in flour, and I stepped off the lunch line, for a second to respond, and then later that night kind of sent in some material that they could see, just like live recordings and stuff that I had done. And I had no formal like press reel or anything, I didn't have any of that. I wasn't that kind of musician. Maybe I'm still not that kind of musician yet, but yeah, so it was like that was a sliding door thing. It was hard, I guess, in the short term it was hard, but looking back on it, I'm like, oh yeah, like if I had been involved in that tour, I would not have been available. Straight up, would not have been available for Bleachers at all.
So,
Bleachers was a brand new thing, and it turned out that it wasn't like a flash in the pan. We didn't just have one huge radio hit and then struggled to connect. I mean, we've had like a pretty slow climb, and we've all been doing it for now almost 12 years, I guess. So yeah.
and when it comes to performing live, what gets you, what's your kind of prep on the day? Are you someone who's like trying to avoid tendonitis, or are you someone who properly warms
Mm.
up? Are you someone who's like, oh, don't bother with that, we're in a rock band, whatever. So what's your warm up routine on the day of a high profile gig?
Mm. A high profile gig like um might be a little more intentional. A lot of times, like I try to eat earlier in the day, or I try to have some window so that I can kind of like digest my food before I'm like going out onto stage. Because there have been too many times over the years where you're like, all right, now's your time, between sound check and the show or something, the food finally shows up, and it's, 7:30, and you're gonna play at 9, or you have this huge meal, and then you
Mm,
go on stage feeling like, I mean, no one would know, like in the audience or whatever, but go on stage feeling like you have a massive, yeah, meal in your stomach, and that's uncomfortable.
yeah.
So I'll be pretty intentional with that, and then otherwise, to be honest, Chris, it's kind of chaotic. There are times where I'm uh asleep or trying to sleep 30 minutes before showtime, and people
Really?
are like, Evan, let's go. Like, yeah. Or people are like, it's time to get dressed. I mean, it's just my brain, I think. But sometimes I don't really have like, there were times where as a group, we were in Bleachers as a group, we were doing vocal warm-ups that were like, it was about a 45-minute warm-up.
Hmm.
We did that for years, and we don't do that anymore because I think what we were, unbeknownst to us, we were straining our voices before the show. Um, at least I was, I can speak for myself and those guys, but um, so that was more of like, okay, we got to start warm-ups, and then we'd have this kind of, for an hour or so, have this together sort of thing, but yeah, I'm to be around, to physically just be on site now is important, like to just be hanging and talking to some of our crew, or handling little stuff, just to be on deck, and get my head kind of, and then you can always, can hear this sort of thump, the residual sounds from, the room. The opener is high profile, though. I think like Radio City was a pretty
Nice.
special one. We, last October we played Madison Square Garden. That was like obviously really special. And sometimes when a show is like that, um, I mean, those are bucket list experiences. Same with Red Rocks, I would say. Um, Family might be there to share in the experience, and get to see, get to see the show from, and get to hang backstage and stuff. So yeah, so when it's that sort of thing, having a little bit of like calmness before the thing starts is important for me.
To the point of sleeping beforehand as well.
Yeah, and I mean it's not now. It's funny because I'm like, yeah, they're. If you ask my bandmates, I'm sure they would be like, "Oh yeah, like let me tell you." You know, for me, I'm kind of. I don't know. If you're tired, what are you gonna do?
You've obviously played with so many different bands and artists. How do you best go about if if I'm a musician, I'm starting to get some gigs, and I start working with some artists of high profile. What's the best way for me to go about negotiating the fee without it being awkward? I mean, it's there's so many artists who go into that world and they're just like, oh, no one's communicated this to me yet. I don't know if I'm going to get paid for it, how I'm going to get paid for it, but they say yes because they're dazzled. Give me one bit of advice in that situation.
I mean, if you ever find a magic thing, please email me. Let me know. It's tricky. It's really tricky, and I don't think it's unique to music or even art making either. I think it's kind of the same for anybody who's like looking at this mm, industry or field, or however you want to think of it. Like, you're starting, but you feel valuable, and it is very tricky. I think universally so. And I I think trends of like, people sharing, or I know in like a university setting, a lot of times they'll publish the salaries and stuff. It's very cut and dried. It's like it's very clear, at least in the US. There's a
Mm.
lot of institutions that will just say this is how much it pays, blah blah blah. Here's the benefits. Of course, in music, nothing works like that. Most of the time, everything is pretty mysterious. Um, I don't really know, I think personally, one thing I do about it, um, is try to keep indie rates for artists, or producers who are working with artists with low budgets. I try to keep, so that and with the things I believe in, things that I feel, I might be able to really contribute. Especially those, like that kind of engagement where I just try to keep another option. Um,
But have you
it's a hard one.
played on something and you're playing on it and you know it's for a big artist and you actually haven't negotiated a fee yet or a contract in any way and you're just like because it's a message come through and can you get on this and that needs to be sorted out afterwards and
Sure.
what would you advise a musician to do in that situation because that exposes you to be ripped off in some ways which we don't want.
which could happen. It could happen, and I think it probably does happen. It doesn't really happen to me, but I think being ripped off. I mean,
Mm,
I would say that man, it's it's okay to be upset about that stuff when you learn how it's happening or you feel or the mystery is like it is unsettling and it's really non-traditional, especially for people like who didn't grow up with professional musicians as parents, like or relatives. I didn't have professional musicians. I had plenty of musicians in my life, but I didn't. Um, Nobody was holding my hand or saying, "Okay, like if this happens, like ask this," or like before you say yes, ask this. It's it's. I think it's man. I mean, it's this is. I usually don't give advice. It just makes this answering this question a little bit harder. But I just think it's probably it's probably related to forces that have nothing to do with the music quote unquote industry, and it's probably just humans behaving in a way that we probably always have. I don't know, and sometimes you do things you're not really sure, like, is that how this is going to go? And I think maybe the calculus could be something like, well, who is this for? Or, there's always data or information you can use to make your decision. If you sat around in the music industry, I think at least for me, if I had been very scrutinizing of things that came through early, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to follow up with something else that's,
mm,
I think, maybe a little more. Yeah. So if I'd have been really scrutinizing early on and needed to know all that information before I would say, yeah, sure, or before I would say, no, no, thanks, I'm good. Um, I wouldn't be where I am, and I think probably most people are the same way. Um, in the jazz world, paying your dues, quote unquote, was kind of this phrase, this sort of catch-all phrase for like, you know, getting messed with or like, or whatever. Yeah. And I was steeped in that too. So in a way, I was kind of already prepped for like a difficult journey.
mm,
Um, so what I will say to all that is, uh, mm, you don't need, and this is kind of me like giving advice to my younger self or whatever. You don't need to be the top call person for like every producer or every artist. If you have three friends, two friends, even just one, if you have one friend who's working on records who believes in you and is like asking you for your, contribution, um, because it's you, one person is enough for stuff to happen.
mm,
And then and two or three people, like close relationships with people who are your friends, really for like, so so I think to some degree, the majority of the work I've been involved with as a session musician is starts with a friendship. And so there's trust, obviously, involved there. And, you expect that your friend isn't going to like, ghost you or whatever, when it comes to payment. So it is weird. I'm not going to say it's not weird. It is weird to do work and then not know how you're going to get paid or even what it's sometimes going to be for. Um, is less mysterious to me in these days than it was when I was like in my late 20s and early 30s. It's definitely different, and it's hard when you're wired to sort of like think of things as like I'm punching in, I'm punching out. Like that was my time, pay me. That was my. And yeah. So I don't really know, Chris. It's hard. That's like if there's any kind of breakthroughs here, like let
I'll
me
drop
know.
you an email. We're going to begin to wrap up. What have you
Okay.
got on the horizon for this year? What's next for you this year?
I'm working on I'm finishing mixes of a new project I'm starting with the friend who I mentioned before, Mac Price. He and I have started a band that's kind of pointing at our childhood in the 90s in Dallas. It's called Continuing Education. So I'm producing this record and I've been mixing them. Second single is coming out on the 14th of February. So that's an exciting thing that I've been working pretty hard on that for a while. And Bleachers is working on the next record. So that's a huge thing. Really excited about that. And it's been really it's been exciting. Yeah,
Awesome.
those are two big things. And then there's like, fielding production requests and stuff along the way for cool music and artists that are coming out with new stuff that yeah, I never heard before.
Awesome. You've got so many kind of different things on the horizon for you. And you've worked on such amazing music. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for your
Oh my gosh.
transparency and honesty. There's so many interesting points you make. My mind has just been blown for the last hour or so. Good luck with what's coming up next. Thank you for continuing the education of us musicians who are listening to this today.
Thanks,
Um,
Chris.
and, maybe we'll have you back on one day because there's so many interesting people that you're working with and so many areas we could delve into. I think it'd be great to explore this even further. So just want to say thank you for being such a great guest on the Stage of podcast.
Oh, I'd love to be back. Count me in, anytime. This is great. And thanks so much for all these awesome questions. This is a privilege. Yeah.
Thanks. Cool.